Shalom Aleichem.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Barak, our panelists, we are honored that you are joining us today, Yom Kippur, the holiest of holy days in the Jewish calendar. It is a great tradition at Washington Hebrew that we spend the day in prayer, reflection, and study. And this is a continuation of that great tradition. I had the great honor, as Bruce mentioned, of being in Abu Dhabi for the one-year anniversary of the Doctrine of Human Fraternity, for the meeting of the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity, and got to see firsthand the incredible work that is being done. We recognize and celebrate the great political achievement of the peace accord, but the groundwork for that was laid many, many years ago. And this is truly an example where religious leadership has paved the way for political leadership. And if I could for a moment talk specifically about Bruce Lustig and his role in the Higher Committee for Human Fraternity. And I can say, and this is probably the only time in my life I will be able to say, that there is only one person in this world that could have put this panel together, and that's Bruce Lustig. And it's a reflection of the work that he has done as part of the Higher Committee for Human Fraternity. And the reverence, and I use that word very carefully, but the reverence with which Rabbi Bruce Lustig, our senior rabbi, is held in the international community. And this is a reflection of the work that he has done over the years, working hand in hand with leaders in the UAE, in the Christian religion. There was a doctrine and document on human fraternity that was signed in February of 2019. It was signed by the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Al-Sharif, Ahmad El-Tayyib. It was also signed by Pope Francis. It lays out the foundation for what has become this historic peace accord. We are grateful for the participation, the contributions, the commitments of everyone here, and the people that you will hear from firsthand. And with that, let me turn it back over to Rabbi Lustig.
Thank you so much. And Lou, you have just a few more hours till the close of Yom Kippur, although you probably wrote that introduction just like my mother wrote it, but we shouldn't have overpraise. I'm delighted to be joined today, and I'd like to introduce our panelists because they are the ones, in many ways, our two guests specifically. And I believe what I hope we will achieve today is to tell the underpinnings of a historic moment in what I like to call religious diplomacy that took place. And I have had the privilege of traveling for the last 7 or more years to the UAE. Jason Isaacson, who joins us as well on our panel, and Jason is it's wonderful. He's with the AJC, and he is the Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer. And I know the AJC has over 20 more years of experience in the UAE. I'm also delighted that we are joined by the UAE's ambassador to the United States, Yousef Al-Otaiba. And Yousef, the ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, has been so instrumental in creating a sense of hospitality and openness with both his embassy, and his personal demeanor to me is so representative of what I've come to know in the UAE. We're also so delighted to be joined by Dr. Picario Foley, the brother John G. Driscoll Professor of Jewish Catholic Studies at Iona College. And it's really important that we have such a scholar on Jewish and Christian and specifically Catholic relations, and understands the concepts of the traveling Pope and other things, which I'm sure she will enlighten for us. And I'm so honored to have with us A.T. Mohammed Khalif Al-Mubarak, chairman of the Department of Culture and Tourism for Abu Dhabi. And he is also a member of the higher committee. I consider him my brother and my teacher. And I have to tell you, the things that he has done to bring culture to the Middle East and to Abu Dhabi are just incredible. And it's a little late for him, but he is in his busy schedule, even though it's post 10 p.m. in Abu Dhabi, he is there with us. So I'd like to ask and begin with a question. What does this Abraham Accord mean to you and to your constituencies? And I'd like to start with the ambassador because he's been so instrumental in both sides of this opportunity. Mr. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. It's an honor to be with you on such a special day. The Accords mean to me a culmination or a coming out party of a place that we've been in for a long time. I know Muhammad's been leading this effort for the last couple of years. Jason and I go back for at least a decade. But what we've done in terms of outreach and interfaith and understanding the Islamic values of respect, inclusion, tolerance, acceptance, that we've been doing for a very long time. Whether we normalize our relationship with Israel or don't normalize our relationship with Israel, that was still an ongoing trajectory that we've been on for a long time because that's part of our DNA. That's part of our genetic code. We inherited this from Sheikh Zayed, and I'm sure Muhammad can speak more about our attitudes towards other religions and ethnicities and backgrounds and races. But that is a construct of who we are as a people. If you want to look at the other side of the coin, the politics and policy side, that means two nation states have finally made a deal to recognize each other and work together. It comes on the tail end of everything we've done in the past. I mean, even before normalization, there is Israeli athletes participating in sports competitions. Even before normalization, the Israeli delegation joined in the Special Olympics. Even before normalization, there was going to be an Israeli pavilion at the Expo next year. So these things were going on even without an official relationship. Now the official relationship is in place, and you can say it will turbocharge or it will bring more visibility to the things that we've been doing with you and with Jason for the past several years. I think it's understandable that people don't know the difference between UAE and the other countries in the neighborhood. I totally understand that. But I really think it's important for people to understand why we think we're different, why we think our culture is a bit different. The reason I'm excited about the Abraham Accords is, when countries talk to each other, it's usually about common interests. So what I'm happy about is the common interest equation has finally caught up with the common values equation, which we've always had. So now you have, with the Jewish community and with the Israeli government, you have common interests and have common values. And it couldn't have come at a better time.
Thank you so much. Mohammed, if you would like to share what this means to your constituency, because you've been instrumental in so much of this.
Thank you, Rabbi. And thank you for having me on this holy day. Yom Tov for everybody. And I hope everybody's having an easy fast. As the ambassador, Yousef Otaiba, alluded to, this is not new to us. This is a part of our DNA. Every household here in the Emirates and in Abu Dhabi feels the Jewish community, the Christian community, and the other religious communities here are a part of a bigger family. When we specifically talk about the Jewish faith and the Jewish communities here in the UAE, as you said, Rabbi, over the last several years, we've built some of the most beautiful museums like the Louvre and many more to come. And we've have paintings from Da Vinci to Botticelli, and the list goes on. But some of the most valued and priceless antiquities and pieces of art and pieces of history that we basically hold very dear to us is parts of the antiquities that we found that are related to the Abrahamic religions, because as the ambassador alluded to, that is a part of our DNA. So whether it's the Jewish tombstone that was found at Ras Al Khaimah somewhere around the 1500s. This is seen as a major masterpiece in our collection. And whether it is the Sir bin Yas Church in Abu Dhabi, that is 7th and 8th century. And the reason why we hold these very dear to us, because it gives an explanation of who we are. During these periods, this was periods of Muslim civilizations, yet Muslim, Jewish, and Christian civilizations worked together for the benefit of a greater cause. And this is what we're seeing today. I think what is happening right before us with the Abrahamic Accord that everybody worked extremely hard to get is almost the movement of a new age. Bringing back from a Muslim, this is almost like bringing back the golden age of Islam, where basically people from the different religions of the world came together for greater causes. In a very short period of time, we have seen the fruits of this Abrahamic Accord, whether it is working together with Israeli doctors and finding solutions for COVID, whether working together to find humanitarian needs for the rest of the world. You are starting in a very short period of time seeing fruits of this. So I'm very excited to what the future is going to hold. And as our history told us, we are brothers. We are brothers in blood, and we're going to continue to be brothers. So I think this is something that's special and very dear to all of us. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Dr. Picario Foley. How do you see this for the Catholic community? You're muted, dear. Thank you so much.
Excuse me, sorry about that. I should know better. I think that the Catholic community receives this document as one in a series of dialogue documents, and dating back specifically to the 60s with the 1960s with the Second Vatican Council. The trick, as always, is to get the good news out. We have some wonderful teachings in our various religions, and we do not always translate that to the majority of, as to use the word you used earlier, constituents. So I'm very excited to be part of this and to be able to talk to Christian and Catholic communities and other dialogue situations, because I will be placing this document in what I teach as the teaching of respect, specifically coming out of a Jewish Christian historical understanding, but that opens up very quickly in the past 50 years or so to include our trilateral dialogue. So I think it's a very important embrace of a common heritage and properly called the Abraham House when we look at that, so that we can, each of our religious traditions can focus on this model of faith and what that means. So that's where I think the Catholic perspective would be, following in this other series of documents which open up each one individually to multiple grassroots efforts. When people know about it and they learn what's in the document, then they can make it real in their own community, and that's key.
Well, a little bit later on, I'm hoping, because Nosferatu was so important and changed the landscape as well, and the document of human fraternity is similar in a sense. And a little bit later, I'm going to ask you, because we can't underestimate this. What we see, I don't believe wouldn't have happened if it had not been the courage of Pope Francis, and even more the courage of the Crown Prince to extend the opportunity to bring both of these leaders to the UAE, and the fruition of such a document. Jason, you've been, what does this mean to your constituency? And you see this, you've been working on policy in so many ways, and you, I'm sure, have a different take on this as well.
Thanks a lot, Rabbi. Not so very different, actually. And of course, when you talk about my constituency, it's our constituency.
Sure.
Very obviously. I can't overstate the excitement that exists in our community about this. Not only, of course, in the American Jewish Committee, which has been traveling to the UAE nonstop for the last 20 years, and we're going to be opening an office there as well. But but frankly, it's a time in American history when we often throw around words like milestone and history making and breakthrough. This really is historic. This isn't just another development. The fact that for decades we've all been taught that peace in the Middle East had to move in a certain direction, had to go through a certain process, and that the obvious synergies that exist, the obvious common threats that exist, really couldn't be addressed until certain other measures were put in place. This upends all of that, and it demonstrates that, that there are real opportunities that can be shared by all the people of the Middle East, that the old prejudices really are being washed away, that the kind of spirit of tolerance and inclusion and diversity that we see exemplified in the Abraham Accords, exemplified in the outreach by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, by the whole government of the UAE to every faith, and non-believers as well, it really clears away so much of the kind of nonsense that has cluttered the path to peace in the region. So it's very exciting. And to see in the space of just a few days, after, maybe it was 3 days or 2 days after the August 13th announcement of the establishment of normal relations between Israel and the UAE, you had a couple of Israeli firms and an Emirati firm making an agreement on medical technology to fight the COVID virus. In just a few more days, you had the Saudi government saying that there could be Israeli overflights to the UAE. Then you had, of course, last month, or earlier this month, excuse me, the Bahrain announcement. And then you had another announcement by the Saudis and other moves from other countries in the region. So the regional implications of this, the constituency that we represent, Rabbi, can I think take what happened on August 13th, what happened on September 15th on the White House grounds, and build a genuine spirit of trust and understanding between the peoples of the Middle East that was unthinkable a month and a half ago and is now realizable.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask, I want to talk to everybody's being a little bit more modest than I think they should. And I know it is part of, very much part of the culture in the UAE. There's no stepping forward and bragging in any sense in terms of this. But Ambassador, I'd like to ask you because, I was very privileged to participate with Sheikh Ben Baya and the Forum for Promoting Peace in the Middle East. I started with that almost 7 years ago. I was one of only 2 Jews in that. Last December, there were 25 Jews with Sheikh Ben Baya who we all lit Hanukkah candles together. Noam was there from the AJC. Half of the speakers that were presenters in this scholarly forum for the brightest and best of the Muslim community were there. In all of my travels, I've been overwhelmed with the incredible, absolute respect. So my question to you, Mr. Ambassador, the Accords built on a philosophical approach of the UAE, which you talked about, and you've exemplified that here in Washington. On the grounds of the White House, when I brought over and there were members of the UAE's delegation that flew all the way from the Jewish community to witness this accord, who comes and gives you a bear hug? The German ambassador, the Israeli German ambassador, Israel's ambassador to the UAE, who's a dear friend of yours. And so your hospitality, your sense, what are the building blocks that have done to create this? Because you mentioned it a little bit, but I'd like you to go in a little more detail because it's been that openness. The iftars that you hold, all of these are just so welcoming and so incredibly inclusive and counter to almost any other culture in America, in the sense that the absolute inclusion that has been demonstrated by the UAE.
So if any of our viewers here have been to the UAE, I think there's a lot of things that stand out, right? The architecture, the beaches, the hotels, but one of the things that stands out to me is the diversity of the country. We're very proud to boast that there's 200 nationalities that live in the UAE, 200. That's 7 more that's in the United Nations.
Hmm.
Every nationality, every religion, every background, every ethnicity is there. That's not a coincidence, right? You can't have that kind of society, a peaceful society, unless there is the value of inclusion, respect, tolerance, things that we have just become more vocal about. And I can get into why we've become vocal about them. But these are things that are inherently in our DNA. So I can't host an interfaith iftar at the embassy if our values don't reflect that back home. So it's not difficult. You know, you mentioned the story of Jeremy. Jeremy is a very dear friend. I've known him for, you know, about 15, 16 years, one of the first Israeli officials I've ever met. He was the Israeli DCM here in Washington when I came here 12 years ago, and we've been friends ever since. I felt it was important to include him. I emailed him when this was about to be announced, and I said, I hope you can make the ceremony. He said, I don't know, we'll see. So I actually invited Jeremy. Like, Jeremy came as our guest. And it was just really nice for us to have that moment, since we've been talking to each other for so long unofficially. Now that we can have this moment and on the world stage where these relationships actually help. So whether it's me or Jeremy, or whether it's us and AJC, or whether it's the Human Fraternity Committee, what you saw on September 15th on the White House lawn comes as a result of years of investment in relationships and building trust. We didn't just wake up one morning and said, you know what would be great is if we normalize with Israel next week. It doesn't work that way. It becomes a gradual process of building relationships and trust and confidence in each other. Now, like I said, on the religious side and on the value side, it was always there. On the government to government side and policy side, it was following a pretty sharp trajectory of moving in the right direction. Annexation was going to interfere with that. Annexation was going to make us say things and do things we did not want to do. So we became sort of very enthusiastic about finding a solution. And we ended up finding a solution that works for everybody. The best part of the Abraham Accords, in addition to the philosophical consensus that it has, is that everybody benefits. Like, no one lost. No one had to give up a concession. No one gave up territory. It was actually something that everyone benefited from. So that's only possible because of the work we're doing on so many fronts with so many of you that takes years and years to build on.
Thank you so much. Mohammed, if you could tell us how the year of tolerance, and also if you'd also, and forgive my Arabic, tasema, I think is the word, because the English word for tolerance, how did the year of tolerance set the stage for such an event? And you've been working tirelessly to bring gifts of culture to Abu Dhabi, including the Louvre, through premier dance schools, cultural opportunities. And how have all these been, as you mentioned, an underpinning? Because you are the one person who on the higher committee continually has one mantra. This is not about us, ladies and gentlemen. This is about what we're doing for our children and our children's children. And that the year of tolerance, I don't think that anybody in America, except very few, really understands what it is for a country to dedicate itself to a full year of tolerance. And if you could explain a little of that and how you see as that the underpinnings, because the signing of the Document of Human Fraternity was part of that year.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. First of all, I'm so glad that you translated tolerance to its Arabic definition of tasamuh. It's a fundamental difference when you translate it, because our year of tolerance wasn't about actual tolerance. It was about tasamuh. And tasamuh, for the ladies and gentlemen that are on this call, is defined as acceptance, as we've heard His Excellency the Ambassador earlier. Acceptance has been a huge part of not just the year of tolerance. Obviously, we shed some light on it on the year of tolerance, and a lot came out of that year. whether it was the Human Fraternity document, the conceptualization from His Highness of the Abrahamic family house. These are two major opportunities that, as the Rabbi also alluded to, are going to give some fantastic positive vibes for the next generation. And this is why we're doing all of this. The main focus that I felt that was critical during that year was how to emphasize acceptance and brotherhood and understanding into our education curricula. It was critical for us that these are taught in our religion classes, so they're taught in the classes of Islam, and at the same time they're taught through the social studies curriculum. So every student in the UAE during that year got a strong understanding of the Abrahamic faiths, whether it's the Jewish faith or the Christian faiths, got understanding of the other faiths that surround us, as His Excellency the Ambassador alluded to also in Abu Dhabi. You know, we are a tight-knit community of, and it's a boiling point.
Ambassador, just say Yousef.
Okay, Yousef. This is what I usually call you on the basketball court when
Exactly.
I you, but I guess. So, but you know, it is a boiling pot of different cultures and different religions. So we took the opportunity on this year of tolerance to focus that on in our curricula. And moving forward, this is going to be a huge part of the educational system, whether it is in primary education or secondary education. And places like the Abrahamic family house will act as a beacon of education and a beacon of hope, and bringing the Abrahamic faiths together from an educational platform.
Thank you so much. And can you tell them just a little bit, because there may be, you know, we have close to 500 viewers on, and I'm not so sure, and I'm going to share something that has been shared with the higher committee on the actual drawings, but tell them a little bit about the, and I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but when you bring all these things, and when we did these things as part of the Document of Human Fraternity, how did the signing of the document fit into that year of tolerance?
So the signing itself was almost the closing of the year. And it's been a document that's been worked on for quite some time. It was worked on by the different religious leadership, whether it is from the Jewish faith, Muslim faith, or the Christian faith, and the other religions that are outside the Abrahamic faiths. And it was a document that was worked on with the understanding of a vision of family and brotherhood. And it all came together in February of that year. It was a fantastic event, as you said, Rabbi, with the presence of His Holiness the Pope and Sheikh Ahmed Tayyib, and the other religious leaders from the different other religions. The document is really a document of, in its simplest form, is bringing us back under the eyes of God of what is it to be a human being. It is loving thy neighbor. It is respecting thy neighbor. It is helping thy neighbor, regardless of religion, gender, ethnicity. So it's a very important document. And now, obviously with the help of Rabbi Bruce being a part of the Human Fraternity Council, he has been a principal in pushing this document in school curricula. And we hope to see this document not just in schools in the UAE, but in schools all over the world, because I think it should be in the essence of a human being to understand the words of this document.
The document is already included in the largest the Al-Azhar University, the world's largest university. Dr. Picario Foley, will you speak a little bit, because this is in a series of things, and the incredible courage that it took. Pope Francis made this trip, and I know that when we spoke before, you talked about this concept of the traveling Pope, but also to speak a little bit from your expertise of what the content of this Document of Human Fraternity happens and how it fits into the conception of this. And in fact, if I'm correct, it's a document that was done really between the Catholic, through the Vatican, the Catholic Church, and the Al-Aqsa, going back and forth. Judge Mohammed Absalem was very instrumental in that. And please tell us a little bit more. You're muted.
I'm so sorry. I taught for 3 hours straight, so I'm never muted. So I'm so. you've mentioned traveling Pope a few times, so I for the benefit of everyone on the call, I use this phrase in our last encounter together because it really is a feature of the contemporary age. The popes, before the 18th century, popes were popes. They did their thing, but the faithful knew their local priests. That was the relationship. But with mass communication, from let's say the 19th century on, I'm not a historian, but I'll give it the 19th century on, the Pope becomes a much, kind of becomes the rock star within kind of the Catholic world, right? And they start writing letters. The fancy word is encyclical letters, but still they're in Rome. And so we have to go forward to the middle of the 20th century, and we begin to have dialogue opportunities that are quiet, not necessarily official, because Christians themselves did not always appreciate the other type of being Christian, right? So, we are the one true way to be Christians. Forget about in a religious dialogue. So the dialogues were happening, they were behind the scenes. In 1964, you get Pope Paul VI, who comes into the Middle East through Jordan, and makes a pilgrimage to places of interest for Christians, into Israel at that point. And I would say that in 1964, the Vatican and Israel did not have diplomatic relations. So to have something like these accords makes every other dialogue a lot easier, right? But he begins to show the world that a pope can travel and can build these relationships. Other speakers have spoken about the importance of carefully building relationship and entering into dialogue. Pope John Paul II went all over the world, dozens and dozens of countries, and would kneel and kiss the ground as a way of accepting all the people, all the culture of that land, this incredible gesture of respect to kiss Mother Earth in the land that he was in. There are many photographs of him in traditional garb from wherever he went. And so that's what I mean by traveling popes. Pope Benedict continued, and Pope Francis jumped right into that mold. So I think that Pope Francis is out there with a lot of courage at a time when our world is so fraught with polarization, and his goal is to just open up dialogue, to be a bridge. In 2013, in one of his first trips, he went to Brazil, and he said this: when leaders in various fields ask me for my advice, my response is always the same: dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. The only way for individuals, families, and societies to grow is via the culture of encounter. And many of our speakers have already spoken eloquently to that notion today of encounter, of personal relationship. A culture in which everyone has something good to give, and everyone has can receive something good in return. Approach people with a spirit of openness and without prejudice. It's a wonderful speech, and it goes on in that vein. And so I think that the signing of the Human Fraternity document is completely part and parcel of Francis's path. With his encyclical on the environment, our common home, not my home, not the Catholic home, our common home. He opens up questions of respect for each other, of injustice, that lead right into the principles and the ethics, as our speakers have said, of the Human Fraternity document. I don't want to take up too much time. There's much more to be said about the document, but that's kind of the big, broad background into which the document lands in the Catholic world.
I would encourage people to read the document. It is a phenomenal document. It is built on the back of the Marrakesh document, the document that was signed here in Washington, the Alliance of Virtue, that was, both of those were brought into fruition by Sheikh Ben Baya. But I also just want to say, before I get to Jason, and I will segue into this, Jason, we have three world leaders who are such humble individuals. Sheikh Ben Baya has nothing to gain from this. He's well in his late 80s. He's, I believe, the head of the Fatwa committee for the entire area, created in terms of bringing the top Muslim scholars, Jewish scholars, and Christian scholars together in the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Society. You have Pope Francis, who is one of the most humble individuals that you could ever meet. And in fact, the Crown Prince, on many occasions, and I don't know what you call the gatherings, but little people know that anybody in the UAE can have audience with the Crown Prince. Mohammed will correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there are these huge meetings that he holds at his various places that are either outside by the lake. I've been to them, and he comes and he greets, and people move around the circle to have a moment. It is so much of the people. So Jason, built on this type of these men's courage and humility, tell me a little bit how you see both the underpinnings of what has been done by the courage of these individuals, and how, we're here, on Yom Kippur, and how do you see the role of religious diplomacy having opened up and changed? And I know I wouldn't have been able to, I was slated to be with the King of Bahrain, but we were on the tails of the AJC, and many of these doors you have opened up through your incredible work over the years, and David Harris's work.
Oh, you're very kind, Rabbi. Thank you. Look, I think you're so right. The religious diplomacy paved the way for a lot of the political diplomacy. I'd say in some ways they kind of fed off each other and contributed to each other, and a kind of a cultural diplomacy, people-to-people diplomacy that is really woven into both of those. And HAC has been proud to be a part of that for a quarter century across the region. But before I say anything else, I really do need to say another word about Ambassador Otaiba, because he was pretty modest in the way he described what led up to August 13th. And I just think it's important to tell this audience that I don't know that we would have got to that point had it not been for the really brilliant op-ed that he published in Yediot Ahronot in June that made it very clear that the UAE was looking ahead to full relations with Israel, recognized the advantages to both countries by moving in that direction, but that annexation would have made it impossible to move forward. And by phrasing it so clearly, framing it so clearly, the earnest desire of the country, and I think more than the country, but certainly of the United Arab Emirates, to recognize and cooperate with Israel, but that there were obstacles that had to be cleared away to get to that point, really changed the course of this. So we could have been waiting for another couple of years to finally realize the dream that we've all had of wider Arab-Israeli relations. But Ambassador Otaiba accelerated that significantly. Obviously, the Prime Minister of Israel seized on that opportunity. The White House seized on that opportunity, and we are where we are today because of all that. But I just didn't want to let this moment pass without saying something about Ambassador Otaiba's contribution to this history. But frankly, I think this notion of religious diplomacy and political diplomacy working hand in hand will not only play out in the Gulf, I'm hoping it'll play out in other places. I'm hoping that we'll see other parts of the Arab world. We're already hearing signals, seeing signals of this. There was a lot of talk a few weeks ago about the possibility of direct flights between Israel and Morocco. Well, actually for years, there have been overflights over Moroccan territory of El Al flights on the way to South America. You had, as I mentioned before, the Saudi overflight decision. You have discussion in Oman. Oman, frankly, for 20 plus years has been hosting the Middle East Desalination Research Center, which is a joint effort of Israel and a couple of Gulf states and other Arab states and the United States and Japan and Korea a regional cooperation program in Oman that brings Omanis and Israelis into regular contact, even though they don't have full diplomatic relations, but they're moving clearly in that direction. So I'm so encouraged by what happened between the UAE and Israel, what happened between Bahrain and Israel, and I'm looking ahead to a further widening of the circle of peace.
And Jason, is this a little bit of the domino effect? The courage that the UAE showed allows the door opening for other areas to begin to have
I believe so. I mean, once again, the UAE has been a pioneer. They're on the way to Mars. They're doing, I mean, everything that you can imagine that a human being can conceive. They seem to be forging ahead in that direction in a very logical, very determined way. I believe that they have made it easier for other countries to also break out of their old mindset, and we're seeing it again and again. And by the way, I think we'll also see, and this is going to be a very important part of the impact of the UAE and Bahrain decisions, a change in some social media perspective on the region, on Israel, on Jews. You'll see more examples of Jews and Arabs working together. You'll see success stories, which will push back against, just tons of propaganda and negativity that have really polluted the region for so long.
Can I add something here?
Please,
Jason
please.
said, I think we've went through 3 demonstrations or examples of breaking taboos, long-held taboos in our part of the world. The first one was hosting the Pope. Hosting the Pope about a year and a half ago, February 2019, followed by a few months later announcing an Abrahamic family house. An Abrahamic family house is a compound that Muhammad's in charge of building that is going to be a mosque, a synagogue, and a church, all adjacent to each other. And last was the Abraham Accords, full normalization between 2 countries that have spent their entire existence not talking to each other officially. The interesting part, in each time we break a taboo, you would expect a backlash. You would expect anger. You would expect people to be angry. And look, there are some, but when the Pope came, surprisingly no backlash. It was the most enthusiastic I've ever seen people in the UAE. People were excited, people were proud, people were lining up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get into the stadium to see the Pope and attend the Mass. The Abrahamic house. I know it's not a big deal in the US, but for an Arab government to build a synagogue in public with government funds, I haven't seen that in my 47 years of existence. I've seen synagogues being restored or, communities being looked after, but I have not seen an Arab government fund the building of a public synagogue. And now the Abraham Accords, where we basically made a political decision, not only was there no backlash, or at least a backlash from the expected sources, other countries are now looking into it. So look, what we're learning is you can break a taboo because clearly the past is the past. I think Rabbi Lustig knows this about us now. We spent most of our time looking at the future. We plan for the future. We plan 10 years out, 20 years out. We want to send people to space and to the moon. We're thinking about what our infrastructure looks like, what our economy, what our energy sectors look like. But it's really interesting to know that every time we do something that's unconventional, either politically or religiously, it doesn't get the negative reaction that most people expected. And so I think that's just going to encourage more people to take these kinds of risks. Of course, they have to do it on their own time. They have to do it when they're comfortable, when they're ready. But we've just demonstrated that we can do things most people have not done and still be seen as successful. I think that's really important to know.
Well, I think that what you're speaking of is what 3 individuals who have the courage of their convictions. And I can't, I have to tell you, having met, and I speak of this in terms of Sheikh Ben Baya, who on my very first meeting with him, as we left, and he hosted and was the first one to bring together with Pastor Bob Roberts, Imam Majid, and myself, Jews, Christians, Jews, evangelical Christians, rabbis, imams, and and pastors. And why evangelical Christians? Because they were the source of the most of the prejudice towards the Muslim world. So they went to the core of that. When I met with Sheikh Ben Bai and I left him, I hugged him and I said, Ani Yousef Achicha, and tears rolled down his cheeks. I said, I am Joseph, your brother. And that has been the type of hospitality. And when you talked about this golden era, Mohammed, you know, you've been a genius behind this Abraham Family House. I don't think people really understand. It's not just a synagogue, a mosque, and a church. It is a concept that embodies the nature of the Document of Human Fraternity. And it's a platform built on. And can you talk a little bit more and let people know more about that? Because I know you've been working so diligently, and I may take a minute or two just to share the document while you talk, the picture. Would that be okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, Rabbi. That'd be fantastic.
We're going to test my technological abilities, but I hope I think you'll be able to speak over this, but we're going to share this. This is amazing, ladies and gentlemen. But this is what Mohammed's been working on. I've been contacted by ministers to say of justice, how do we make it easier for people here is there any conflicts for Jewish law? How do we make things more comfortable? The hospitality is phenomenal. Somebody tell me if this is sharing on your screen.
Yes, it's perfect.
Oh, perfect.
Rabbi, turn the volume down, please.
Okay. I'm going to turn the volume down.
So you're basically taking a drive right now on Saadiyat Island. Saadiyat Island is our cultural island in Abu Dhabi. This is the island that hosts the Louvre, the Guggenheim, the Sheikh Zayed National Museum, so some grade A architecture. When His Highness Sheikh Mohammed envisioned this, he envisioned it with a vision of brotherhood. And as you can see, you have these beautiful 3 buildings that sit on an equal pedestal, and they're kind of raised. And his vision was that people would perceive these buildings from a distance as being almost completely equal in their nature, whether it is equal in their height, and you would have to get closer to the building to see these subtle differences. For example, listen, each building from the inside has its own DNA. This, what we're looking at, is the mosque. Its DNA is really based on the material of stone. And these buildings are not small buildings. We're talking about these buildings are over 40 meters tall. So they're just beautiful structures. We did a competition and we had world architects.
We're losing you a little bit.
The world, and this was the way, because Highness's view of the. Can you hear me now, Rabbi?
Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. So we've just went through the mosque. The synagogue obviously is in the direction of Jerusalem, and the church is and the mosque is on the direction of Mecca, and the church is in the direction of Rome. Now, when we look at the mosque itself, again, so we've talked about the mosque is stone, the church is wood, and we took the essence of wood. Obviously, it's because the prophet Jesus was crucified on the cross, on a wooden cross. Now we're looking at the synagogue. All these places of worship, plus or minus, hold close to 1,000 worshippers inside the space. We have worked very closely with the religious leaders from all the religions to get all their guidelines and specifications. The material that we focused on here is brass, and you have this beautiful this brass that comes from all the way from the top to the bottom and creates these beautiful shadows, and it plays beautifully with the light, and it just drapes all the way down through the synagogue. And we've taken, like I said, we've taken into account all the different whether it is in the church or the synagogue or the mosque. We've taken all the different sects, so everybody will feel free to pray and worship in these places. There's a 4th building that sits underground, and that's a building that is a building of education a building of bringing all the communities together. So this is a place where we're going to celebrate Passover, we're going to celebrate Yom Kippur, we're going to celebrate Christmas, we're going to celebrate Eid together. And that was the vision of His Highness. As Rabbi Bruce spoke earlier, obviously we like to work fairly quickly. So the good news, ladies and gentlemen, we have started this project. We have awarded the contractor. We are moving with the speed of light, and inshallah, keeping fingers crossed that in the second quarter of 2022, we would welcome our first worshippers to this premise. And I think it's going to be a beautiful day and a beautiful sight for the world to see. I hope that was okay, Rabbi.
No, it's beautiful. And I want to publicly thank, because Mohammed Mubarak has been so instrumental in not just, you know, these are not facades that are being built. This is not a wonderland for the religious to go and see their particular pieces. This is a functioning area. And we've talked on the committee, the Higher Committee for Human Fraternity, about what is going to take place, what type of programs can we do, what are the types of things that this will be a beacon and a center to create opportunities for human fraternity in this aspect. So I'm so grateful for all that you have done. I want to go back a little bit, and I want to ask Dr. Foley, you know, this Pope is quite unique. I've been in the presence of others. I had an audience actually on Shabbos Shuvah last year, was invited by the Pope to a consistory. His incredible humility and his humanity, and I think that this is the confluence, if you will, of three incredible world leaders who are so humble and so worried about the future. Can you speak a little bit about that effect and change that is had, and what the Vatican is building on with this, and how the Document of Human Fraternity fits into the vision of this Pope?
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that you highlighted the humility of these three leaders, and their, as you said, they have the courage of their convictions, and that's how all of this got done. In March, late in March, the Pope was in St. Peter's Square all alone and live streamed across the world a Catholic service, but it was to pray for the world in the face of the pandemic. And he referenced the gospel story of the storm at sea, and he woke up from sleeping in the end of the boat and telling the people, the disciples in the boat with him, do not be afraid. And he wove a beautiful sermon that kept saying, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. So he's this incredible man of faith, right? Like Father Abraham, man of faith, but humble, as you say, but deeply serious about the neglected and the poor of this world. And he's very well aware that military conflicts, runaway economies that benefit the few and hurt the majority. Anything, any dialogue, any peace accord, anything that can help the plight of the poor is what he wants to do. That's why he's so focused on the care for the earth. Because if we don't care for the earth, everyone will be quite poor. So as far as human fraternity and this document that needs to be taught at so many levels, his groundbreaking work in going to the UAE and signing this document, it is just such a clarion call for everyone to recognize the human dignity of the other, to break down the us-them mentality, to break down the polarization in the world. We are one human family, and there are parts of, I mentioned this in our last gathering, the Human Fraternity document in the second paragraph says, where we shared the joys and the sorrows and the problems of our contemporary world. And this is almost right out of a document from 1965 from the Second Vatican Council, where the church was saying, we want to be brothers and sisters to every human being on the planet. We share the problems and we should share the joys. So his humility, but his strength is a comfort, I think, to everyone. And he says, do not be afraid. And echoing the words of Jesus and emboldening and giving people the courage of their convictions to step out of an us-them mentality, that it's not my religion or your religion. It's not my version of Christianity or my version of Judaism or my version of Islam. It's how can we make each other whole? How can we be one together? And moving from the document to the beautiful video of the Abraham House, to learn, which I did not know, so thank you for teaching me just now, that there's the fourth building underneath it, that foundation where you have that culture of encounter, where there is acceptance, as was said earlier, tolerance. I don't know the Arabic language, I apologize, but it was explained that tolerance means acceptance. This whole embrace of the other person. So I just think that's what he's doing.
I'm going to interrupt just for a second so we can get some closing thoughts. But, you know, what I see is that for all of us, we read on Rosh Hashanah, we read the story, you know, of Abraham, and Abraham becomes a central figure. And this accord is called the Abraham Accord. And it is Abraham who welcomes everybody into their tent. It is the reconciliation between Abraham's two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, who do this. They come together to bury their father in the cave of Machpelah. This incredible hospitality and this opportunity that we have as a human family. And to me, this was so important of why we do this on Yom Kippur, because there is now a beacon in the Muslim world which has been echoing in so many ways, the beacon that I believe has been held up by the AJC for the Jewish world in many ways, of saying that we can have a mutual tolerance, if you will. We can have a type of understanding. So in closing thoughts, I'm going to start with you, Jason, on Yom Kippur. What are the things that we should learn and move forward with? And I'd like to go around and get closing thoughts and just simply thank everybody. Jason?
Rabbi, thank you. And of course, good Yontif to you and to everyone. Gemar Hatima Tova. Closing thoughts. Look, we've all been working for decades to try to realize the vision that so many people in the region, unfortunately, held back by too many leaders, but the people of the region have yearned for peace. Israel has certainly yearned for peace. But so many in the Arab world have wanted to put the hostility and the wars behind them and to move forward into a new reality, and to have a visionary crown prince in Abu Dhabi, visionary ambassador in Washington, people like yourself and other people of goodwill, and of course His Holiness the Pope, all come together over the course of the last 2 years to look at this anew. To reach out in brotherhood and fraternity and solidarity with a very different vision that could be put forward to allow for peace and prosperity for all the people of the region is just so inspiring. And on Yom Kippur, when we're thinking about difficulties of the past and transgressions of the past and looking ahead to a new year and a new kind of enactment of the obligations that we have to our fellow men and women, to begin on this positive note after, frankly, a horrible year in so many other ways, it really just fills me with joy and with a feeling that that it is possible to put prejudice and outmoded, irrelevant thinking behind us and to actually reach for a vision that you've had, Rabbi, and that others on this call have had for so long. And we're finally moving in that direction. So I'm excited. I'm excited about what the impact is going to be on the next generation of leaders of all of our communities. I'm excited about the change that I hope we will start seeing in social media, the change that I hope we'll start seeing in UN and other multilateral forums. I'm hoping that we'll see maybe even it will infect our own politics. I know that's asking for a lot, but when we actually see that you can dream about peace and reconciliation and actually take steps in that direction is thrilling and encouraging.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Otaiba, you have, I want to get your closing remarks on this, because in some way, the history is going to be written that the two-state solution was not, it was not the Jews that got together and saved a two-state solution, but I believe that we'll find out that it was an Arab nation that was interested in the benefit of all humanity and making sure that there was an opportunity. How do you see in your closing remarks the opportunity that we have, and what would you like to say to the Jewish community about seizing this opportunity?
I would say that attitudes, mindsets, points of view that were seen as conventional in our part of the world are changing. You can see it through the examples that we've outlined today, whether it's the Pope's visit, the Abrahamic house, the normalization, you name it. It's changing. We've done polling in the region that confirm that what we think is happening is actually really happening, especially with young people, And so it's one of the most challenging things for anyone to do is to let go of their preconceived notions, right? This is the way it's always been done. It's just easy to stick to the status quo. We shouldn't normalize until there's a Palestinian state. By the way, that was logical 20 years ago, but we made no progress on it. So we're gonna try something different. People are tired of conflict. People want opportunities. I saw a question in the chat that how will this be a warm peace? How will this be different from Jordan and Egypt? I think you're already seeing it. It's 6 weeks into the agreement. We don't have direct flights yet. We don't have taxation agreements or civil aviation agreements. I'm already seeing MOUs being signed on COVID research, on AI, on film festivals. Last 3 days ago, I saw something between an Emirati businessman, a very prominent businessman, and the largest self-driving technology company in Israel signed an MOU. These things are happening before there's even a direct flight. And so I am confident there's going to be a warm peace. I'm confident that young people are going to find each other and either study or exchange views, research, trade, invest with each other because we want to. This is not being forced on anyone. People want to do this. People are curious. They want to know what Israel and Israeli culture is like. I hope the Israelis respond reciprocally and say, tell me about your country. Tell me about your history. Tell me about Sheikh Zayed. So my only ask is just keep an open mind. You know, I think you're going to see a very enthusiastic young population from the UAE come try to explore and understand Israel. I hope Israel does the same. That's how you have peace. That's how you actually have a healthy, mutually productive relationship between countries, is when the people accept each other and don't look at each other as enemies. And I think that's exactly the direction we've been going in. I just hope it only works if it comes from both sides. It doesn't work. No relationship works if only one side is pushing and the other one side is resisting. This has to be mutual if this is going to work.
And you had Jason was so glad to, I know he's written about your op-ed and he's written some great pieces about this, and I encourage people to read what a couple of the articles that Jason has put forward, Jason Isaacson has put forward, but your courage to write directly to the Israeli people in an op-ed was, it was simply brilliant. And I think it speaks to that openness and that sense. Dr. Picario-Foley, what do you see as, in your hope briefly, of what this does for the future of interfaith relations?
Oh, I think it's another big step forward in multilateral dialogue. The Swiss Catholic priest and theologian Hans Kung said many years ago, there'll be no peace among the nations without peace among the religions. and no peace among the religions without dialogue among the religions. And so certainly the Human Fraternity document and the project that you're involved with and the High Committee creates programs and platforms and facilitates all of that religious dialogue on what I think Jason called religious diplomacy. And as I noted earlier, official relations between countries also then allows for the free exchange of travel and ideas and all of that, so that then you can have all of these types of dialogues at the various levels, grassroots, academic. So I'm noticing in the chat a lot of people using the word joy, and what a wonderful word to see in a year that's been so difficult for everyone, 2020. So joy, and we'll keep working at this at our different levels.
Vatican, if I can interrupt, the Vatican had, unfortunately, was canceled for the COVID, but there was an international, all world educators were to come to a big thing in May that the Vatican was sponsoring, which was to talk about how do we implement the principles of the Document of Human Fraternity in curriculum from grade school all the way through. I'd like you to talk a little bit, Mohammed, in your last thing about what you think the role, because I've witnessed you not in your garb now, but in the most tailor-looking Armani suit, walking through the halls of the UN, and charming and presenting both this and other things that have done. I have to tell you that one of the greatest honors of my entire life has been being chosen to be part of the higher committee and to meet gentlemen, a generation like yours, Mohammed, who gives an old geezer like me a lot of faith in our future. And if you talk a little bit about the work of this document and what you envisage, because your continual mantra, and you have made it happen, is bringing young people. When we were going to do this thing in February, you said half of the audience has to be young people. They need to be college students. You've brought universities to Abu Dhabi. You've created opportunities for cultural exchange. You've brought incredible dance companies there and opened this up so that people come and see the incredible hospitality. What do you envision in your closing remarks?
Thank you, Rabbi. And thank you for making me look like 007. But Rabbi, I think one thing that we have both shared at the Council for Human Fraternity is, I think for all this to work, and we've heard Yousef talk about this, it has to be a youthful movement. It has to be entrusted to the next generation. They have to believe this. I think, unfortunately, our past comes with a lot of luggage. I think it's time for us to throw away all perceptions, all misconceptions that we had about each other. You know, just less than 1 year ago, I'm sure the people of Israel thought that everybody in the UAE thought negatively of them. Now, you know, it is phone calls, like Yousef said, on a daily basis, smiles, let's get to know each other a little bit more. I can't wait to visit Haifa, can't wait to visit Tel Aviv. They say we can't wait to visit Abu Dhabi. You know, it's been beautiful to see. And I think it is this energy that is coming from the youth that want change. So I think everything we do, we need to kind of take a step back and think about what is the best way we can communicate this to that generation. It is no longer the ways that maybe we've done in the past. It has to be a new vision. It has to be a new way, and they need to carry this torch forward. So I think it's our programs, our policies have to have that in mind. And this is what I hope that we will see together in the near future.
And I look forward, I'm working with Mohammed Mubarak about trying to engage our college students in a similar engagement, because he's so interested in bringing this dialogue between Jews, Christians, and Muslims to our college campuses. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. This is Yom Kippur. This is the day in which we fast, and a day in which we think about not only what was, but what we hope to be. And we all say that so you should be written into the book of life. We are written into the book of the life by our deeds. The only thing that will avert is that our prayers, our acts of loving kindness, and our humanity towards one another. You all give an example so much to us of people who work for the betterment of the common weal. I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity, but more importantly, to Jason, I want to thank you for your incredible work that you've done for more than a quarter of a century, not only in the UAE, but all over the world. I know you and what you do. I see you stand in front of the room full of 400 to 500 ambassadors each year at the Seder that we're often privileged to host with AJC. May you go from strength to strength. Dr. Foley, Picario Foley, I look forward to working with you again. You're an incredible scholar, and I know the students at Iona are lucky to have you. When I was, we were on a panel together, but your name came highly recommended from sources of mine at the Vatican as well, and they were so right, and thank you for doing this. And to our dear friend, the ambassador, may you and your family, your wife is an equal partner with you here in your hospitality and your persona. You give a new face to what the Middle East can be. And I want to thank you for all that you have done, continue to do, and your great concern for all that takes place. And to my good friend, Mohammed Mubarak, I look forward to traveling with you. I hope that we'll have our next higher committee in the UAE. But your work, you have beautiful children, and I know that your work is not so much for what you want to achieve, but what you want to achieve to make a better world for them. I want to thank you because you've raised the ability of us. I want to thank Lou Weiner. I'm going to spot him back in, not only for Lou traveled with me, but for what he has done and his great help and advice and his stewardship of our congregation. I wish to all of you a Gamar Chatima Tova. I'm going to get off because I'm doing the main sanctuary to start a service in just a minute. I want to thank you all for giving us this incredible opportunity. May you go from strength to strength. And we say that, you know, our blessing is that may your coming and going be blessed. You make our days a blessing, and you make our future a blessing. Thank you all so much. A Gamar Chatima to all, and a good Yontiv to all. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Rabbi Lustig, thanks for what you do for our community and our world.